November 18, 2017, I experienced a dream come true. I was at a local bookstore and my name was on the signs. It was a sunny fall afternoon and everything had gone perfectly. The book cover looked great, the marketing campaign had gone off excellently, and dozens of people showed up to ask me to sign their books and ask me about my writing process. I couldn't believe this was actually my life. It was so surreal, and it was a moment of victory. I was at the launch of my fourth book, the finale of the series that I'd been writing for nearly a decade, and it was an incredible sense of victory, relief, and celebration to finally be at this mountaintop moment. However, it was also pretty unnerving. For 10 years, I'd known what I was going to be doing next year, and the year after that, and the year after that. My creative path had been forged, and I knew exactly how to follow it, until I reached the end of this series. I had this strange moment of wondering what comes next. Can I ever top what I've already done? Have I peaked? Do I even want to do this again, to create another book project? To fully understand this moment, you have to flash back to the beginning of my journey. I was a kid who loved to read, and I read as often as I could, everywhere that I could, whether that was under the covers with a flashlight or in a tree. However, I did not always love to write. I thought writing took too long, it hurt my hand, gave me hand cramps, and I just thought, leave that to someone else. That is, until I was in 5th grade, and I began a creative writing project for the first time. I had to finish a project about a rabbit caught in a trap in a blizzard. And so I finished the assignment, and I gave it to my mom to read. And to my great surprise, she began to cry in front of me. And I thought, oh no, I've written the worst story ever. But to my surprise again, she told me that this pretend story I'd created about a rabbit that didn't exist in a blizzard that I'd made up made her feel the real emotion of sadness. It actually changed the way she felt. And I had this light bulb go off in my head. I realized that when I create a story, even though it may not be a real setting, it can change people's emotions, it can change how they think, it can change the world. That when I write that story, I can change the reality around me. And all of a sudden, writing became much more appealing. It was a sense of power and excitement that I could be a part of changing the world through writing. So by the time I was 14, I decided this is what I really want to do with my life. It was like discovering a mountain in the distance. Neil Gaiman, the author of Stardust and many other famous books, described this in a speech to a group of art students graduating. He called it Make Good Art. And he describes that creative project as a mountain in the distance. And that every time you're offered an opportunity on a creative path, you have to decide, will this take me closer to my mountain or farther away from it? And that's how you can evaluate the opportunities that come your way. So early on in my life, I discovered what that mountain was, and I began to pursue it with passion and without fear, blissfully unaware of things that could go wrong along the way. I began to do things like practice exhaustively. I joined groups of other students who loved to write. I sought feedback. I listened to author talks, and I was full of passion and enthusiasm because I discovered what I felt was my mountain. Fast forward a few years, I decided to study creative writing in college, and I began to realize that the path to the mountain can have obstacles in it. So I discovered that there are things like criticism that come along the way, publisher rejection, that's a lot of fun, and the fact that when you graduate from college with an English degree, a writing job as a novelist may not be waiting for you tidily packaged on the other end of that. That was a bit of a setback, those obstacles from without. But part of the obstacle discovery was obstacles coming from within myself. The discovery of what many creatives call the inner critic. That voice inside telling me, you are absolutely incapable of doing this. This is going to be terrible. No one's ever going to read it. Why are you even bothering to try? So it's a pretty nasty voice coming from inside, but it's pretty normal among creatives to have that voice coming in from there. I actually read a few years later an anecdote by Elizabeth Gilbert, author of Eat, Pray, Love, and she describes her own journey of coming to grips with fear from the inside. She imagines fear and the other voices inside as part of her psyche as a family on a road trip, and that early on in her creative career, fear would always tell them where they were going and drive the vehicle. And so as she got more mature in her journey, she imagined herself having this conversation with fear and saying, Fear, I appreciate that you're part of the family. I appreciate they're here to help me make good decisions and keep from dying. You may come on the family road trip. You may offer your input. The one thing you may not do is drive. And that gave me a lot of inspiration along the way, because I realized fear will be a part of the journey, but it's about developing a healthy relationship with fear and not allowing fear to make the decisions. I had a couple of opportunities to explore this relationship along the way. In college was when I started actually writing my first published book, The Illuminator's Gift. And I began to write it in my college dorm room around the time I was realizing that things like criticism exist, realizing this may never go anywhere. And I realized that I wanted to do it anyway. I loved writing so much that I would do it for free. I didn't care if anybody saw it. I mean, it would be nice. But I continued with that process because I really wanted to write this story. I felt like I had something to say. So I continued with that project, graduated from college, and faced another crossroads pretty shortly after graduation. One of my first jobs out of college was as a nanny, and I had a nice steady job going, good family, good kids, and best of all, a steady income. And I still remember the day I quit. It was a very difficult decision because that steady income was hard to turn down, especially as a recent English graduate with not sure what I was going to do next. But I remember reaching a crossroads where I had to decide, am I going to be able to move closer to my goal of writing? Am I going to be able to pursue opportunities that are more closely tied? Or am I going to stick with what I know, this steady job? And I thought about it a lot because it was very hard to turn down something that was so steady. But I ultimately decided that the mountain mattered more, that if I was going to move closer to that I needed to step out and pursue opportunities that were more closely tied to that dream. I did, and I'm glad that I made that choice. Another crossroads came down the road when I actually finished writing the first book. It took me about 5 years to complete my first manuscript that I was ready to seek publication for. So as I began to get ready to publish, I had conversations with other authors. I did lots of research to figure out what was the best route to pursue for publishing. And I specifically remember a conversation with one author who had been writing for more than 10 years. But in those 10 years, she had published successfully 2 books, many fewer than she'd actually written. And of those 2, one had gone out of print. And so after 10 years, she had 1 book still in circulation. And so I remember having this conversation with myself where I realized, is this the best that I think I can do for myself? And I ultimately, after weighing my options, decided to self-publish. I decided to take that gamble and bet on myself, that with the skills and the knowledge I had, that I could publish more books in less time, keep more of my earnings, and more creative control than I would through a more traditional path. It was, again, a very scary decision, lots of fear going on there, because a traditional path is set for you. It's easy, or easier, and this was not. I didn't know anybody else who had done this, but I decided this was the best path to get my story out there and to keep on moving toward my mountain. So I did. I published the book, and one would think that would be the end of the story. Hooray, book published out in the world. But as a matter of fact, it was only the beginning of the next journey. Not only were there more books to write as I continued with my series, I wrote 3 more books in 5 years, the next 5 years, but it also set me off on this roller coaster of being my own publisher and my own marketer. And suddenly there were lots of hats to wear. And when people think of a professional writer, when I thought of a professional writer, I often imagined someone quietly sequestered away in a cozy attic, probably wearing a beret and sipping a cup of tea. But in fact, that may be part of the journey, but it actually involves a lot more hats than just the beret. So during the 5 years in which I was promoting my own series, I learned to wear lots of hats. I learned to juggle the ups and downs of hiring creative contractors. I learned to run a table at a book fair. I learned to do lots of speaking. As an introvert, that was a scary journey. I did interviews with anyone who would ask. I learned to do my own social media and, scariest of all, my own accounting. So there were lots of hats to wear, and they all came with their own levels of fear. Everything was new, and I did a lot of faking it till I made it. But as along the way, I realized that the more I faked it, the more I felt the confidence that I was projecting. And by learning to wear all these hats and try these new things, I was not only moving closer to my mountain, but I was becoming a more confident version of myself, which in itself was a reward. There were plenty of ups along the way. I still remember the day I found out that my book had won its first award, and it was such a euphoric experience. I was so dizzy with excitement I couldn't do anything else for the rest of the day. There were also plenty of downs, and continue to be. The rejections have come and continue to come. There are still things I'd like to be part of that I haven't yet had the opportunity to do. And that's all part of the journey toward the mountain. And so on November 18, 2017, I found myself at the launch of my fourth and final book in the Voyages of the Legend series, and it was a perfect day. I felt like I'd finally reached the mountaintop. Everything went well, dozens of people turned out, and it was such an exciting moment, especially when I looked at the table in front of me and I saw the 4 books that I'd written and realized I'd published over 1,000 pages of writing in the last 10 years. And that was such an exciting moment to realize I'd worked hard, I'd followed the path, I'd kept on it through the obstacles, and reached something that I'd wanted for such a long time. And it would be nice if that were the end of the story. Here we are about a year afterwards, and the uncomfortable turn here is that I have not produced another novel in the last year. And that comes with all sorts of interesting questions from within. It's not that I haven't done other projects. I have tried to turn my first book into an audiobook and seen that produced. I've done a couple of other shorter works and seen them written and published. And those have all been exciting in their own way. But the nagging question remains, I haven't written another novel. Will I ever write another novel? Do I even want to write another novel? It came with a series of interesting and worrisome questions as I began to wonder about my mountain. All these years I'd been pursuing that mountain of writing in front of me. Was it gone? Had I been going the wrong direction? Did I take a wrong turn somewhere along the way? Why was I having these nagging questions coming from within? So I discovered this quotation by Benjamin Franklin, which gave me a lot of understanding of what was going on. He said, either write something worth reading or do something worth writing. And this helped me to gain perspective on where I was a year after publishing my final book. I realized that I was tired. That after writing a series for 10 years, I had reached a point where my creative well was drained. And that I'd been writing from past experiences and not really replenishing those along the way. And it left me wondering, do I even want to continue writing? Is this what I'm after at all? More importantly, it led me to the realization that good writing comes from living. A lot of people think that writing means setting pen to paper, and yes, that is part of the process. But really, that's only the tip of the iceberg. Good writing comes from the things that we do in our lives and the sensitivity we have to those experiences. And that in the flurry of writing something worth reading, I'd overlooked doing things that were worth writing. And so this past year, I really set out to refill that creative well and try things that I'd not tried in the past. I've really done some things that have surprised me. This year I got to bathe a baby elephant in Thailand. I learned to ride a lawnmower. I chased fireflies, read books, experienced love, laughter, and loss, and even started a new job as a high school English teacher. So all sorts of experiences have come into my life that have refilled the creative well and given me new perspective, to the point where I'm realizing, while I thought writing was a mountain somewhere off in the distance, perhaps writing is really more like a mountain range. Perhaps this journey is something that continues to expand in front of me, with new goals that arise after one is completed. I haven't done a lot of writing this year, but just being immersed in these experiences has given me that new perspective I needed to move forward on that. And so I come to the three takeaways to writing your own story. It starts with discovering your mountain. What is that passion that drives you, that you would do for free, that you would do if no one else were watching, and if no rewards ever came from that? Something you would do just for the love of it. It might be a creative path like writing, or it might be something else. When you find that mountain, it inspires you to work towards it and get there, which is the second takeaway, to remember to stick to the journey. There will be obstacles no matter what the path may be, maybe more if you're creative. But sticking to the journey, pressing on through those obstacles is what will ultimately allow you to achieve that mountain in the end. And finally, it's important to refill the creative well. And no matter how much passion you have for what you're doing, there will be times when you feel empty and when you need to replenish those experiences by not just writing something worth reading, but doing something worth writing. And so here at this point in my journey, I find myself still wanting to write things worth reading. I still love words. This is still what I want to do, and I'm more sure of that than ever. However, I'm remembering that I also want to do things worth writing, that it's important to get out and experience life because that's where good writing comes from. And as I hold on to the premise that the horizon is wide and it's never too late to keep exploring. Thank you.